Rise Up. I'm Michelle Bango. I'm your gardening guru, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about lavender. We get a lot of questions about how to grow lavender, and to be honest, it's easy. But you have to know a few basic things to really get going. One, your climate. You know what zone you live in. It will not grow in hot or really hot or really dry climate. You have to have a Mediterranean type climate to grow it, which means, cooler nights, warmer days. You don't have to have great soil. They do really good in rocky, sandy soil. Even I've grown them in clay soil. The thing is, you have to know your types. Like Hyde coat, however you want to pronounce it, does really well in my area, Pennsylvania. And we are in a zone, we're between zone 4 and zone 5. And this is an example of a Hyde coat that has been, I call it spent. Normally I harvest my lavender when it's in bud form. But I have so much left from last year, I just decided I'm just going to let it go to flower because it's so beautiful as just a flower and it smells so good. So when you come to the point where you want to harvest, you have to look down into your plant and see this woody spot where this is the new growth. This is the wood. You don't want to cut into the wood. You just basically snip off and the sharper the scissors, the better. Snip it off, and that's all you have. And now this, you can dry this, but the buds won't stay on. It'll last, maybe a year. But you're not going to be able to put it on a wreath or anything because they will fall off. There's a certain point, if you want to keep it together for several years, you have to do it as they are starting to come out. But like I said, I let this one go because I wanted to see it out here. And that's basically all you do to harvest it. You just keep it and just be very careful on where you cut it. Just grab it, and it smells wonderful. Now, if you're into the crafts and things, this type is really good for like your wands where you hide this part, but you can still smell it. We can get into that later. But basically, that's all there is. Now, if you noticed, my bush is kind of leaning. It's because they follow the sun, so they're going to lean towards the sun. That's just the way it is, unless you have a great big open field where they get sun all the way around. And I can show you an example of that where it gets sun on all sides. But the smell is so worth the effort. Now, we get a lot of questions about how do I prune these? What I do, what works best for me in my climate, is I will let these grow. I'll get another small cutting off of these in a little bit. And then I prune it back just like I'm doing here, but in the spring is where I'll actually take it down a little bit further into the plant. You might think this is dead. It's not. It's just old growth from last year because some of my plants didn't get pruned properly this spring because we had such a wet spring. But that's all you do. But you just have to be very careful not to cut deep into the woody part. And that's pretty much it as far as the harvest. As far as fertilizer, you really don't need any. If you have a good ground, they don't need any any added fertilizer to it. To be honest, I don't think I've put anything in any of the ones I've planted. Some of mine are, gosh, I planted them when we moved here over 9 years ago, and they do great, and they don't require a lot of water. Do not overwater them. That's one of the mistakes a lot of people make. They think they're like a tomato plant that needs a lot of water. They're not. They can withstand a lot of dryness. The one thing that you want to keep in mind, if you live like we do here in the snow belt, you have to, it's a good idea, you don't have to, but it's a good idea to put some straw or some leaves around the root, just to protect it a little, because here, I don't know, a few years ago when we had several days of like 30 below weather, I did lose some, just because they're not meant for that type of climate. But other than that, there's, I'll show you over here one of my plants that I've planted. This plant here is probably, gosh, I want to say this is 6 years old, 5 years old, something like that. It's huge. I mean, you can see how big it is. This is one of the ones I don't usually cut to dry because, you know, it's part of my landscape. But eventually I am going to cut it back because the flowers will die and it'll look shabby. But you can see how when it's got sun, you know, when it's got room to grow all the way around, how nice and big they get. This is a hide cot, or hide coat, whatever. And that's pretty much it. Just do your homework. If you're out in the greenhouse, I highly suggest not buying from a big box store because they don't really send you the type that's going to thrive in your area. Go to a greenhouse, a local greenhouse that knows what to plant for your area. And you know, you'll have better luck with you know, the growing process. Now in the spring, they'll start out and they will be awful looking. You're gonna think that they're dead, and they're really not. They're gonna have, you know, all of the leaves that are still on there are gonna turn gray. Kind of like if you look down in here, who knows what we're gonna find down here. Spiderweb. They're going to look like this, like in your early spring. But if you say, take this one, if you let it go, don't cut them back, don't touch them until you start to see these little green growths. Then you'll know that your plant survived, and you can, you know, then you know to go back and trim off a little bit more than what you've trimmed off in the fall. Trying to think. I'm trying to think what else I could tell you. There are a lot of, they're coming up with a lot of different varieties. There's a dozen different varieties of lavender, and they're coming up with hybrids that, in fact, if you come here, this is a hybrid. They're supposed to be, and I honestly cannot remember the name of it. It's blue something. But you can see I'm not happy. It doesn't do as well as the old traditional, you know, hide coats. It wasn't supposed to get real big, but it is. And I mean, it's got nice long flowers. The stems on it are nice and long, but they're not dark, and usually people prefer the dark. But if you don't, you know, I mean, it still has the nice lavender smell, but I just prefer the old traditional. But it's a beautiful plant, and you know, it'll stay. It goes good with my bee balm. But again, I'll come back and trim this off here probably in a day or two, and just use them as fresh flowers, and mix them with some herbs. Like I'll come over and cut some, this is oregano. You just cut it, strip it, and you just make a little bouquet and stick it in a vase. And you have a beautiful smelling bouquet. If you have any questions, post it on in the chat or question, whatever, and I'll try to answer them for you. Have a good day.